Alliance has gone too far this time. However, of all the hot takes I've had about this series throughout my time in the community, this is the one that I most expect to be alone on. The series has felt pretty slow in its progress for the last 6 years, until now. Alliance is getting so many updates that I can barely keep up with it as a beta tester, and a big part of that frequency is thanks to the beta testing periods for these updates being so short. If something is fundamentally flawed, that means it needs to be fixed through changes to its in-game mechanics. That simply cannot happen at this breakneck pace for game updates. It would require too much time to animate, program, and implement new mechanics in place of flawed old ones. So even mechanics that everyone unanimously dislikes are going to stay in place in these updates. I'm sure you can see where I'm going with this. The final stage of the Ancient Hunger expansion introduces a mechanic that goes too far for me to be able to tolerate it. I genuinely believe that this is the worst level of any Kingdom Rush game that has ever been made, almost solely because of this mechanic. It's unfortunate to end on a low note, since I think the update itself does a lot of things right, but I can't understate how much I dislike the final levels mechanic. I'm not holding back from spoilers anymore. The update came out very recently, but I trust that people will have already experienced the mechanic or decided that they don't care about spoilers by the time they reach this point in the video. In Stage 22, one tower will be destroyed at waves 3, 5, 8, 11, 14, and 15. The selected tower is completely random, meaning that you are at risk of losing a significant amount of gold every time this effect triggers. That is, unless you spam low-level towers, which is the intended way to beat this stage. I fear that I may have unintentionally played some role in the design of this mechanic when I called out the tower balance in my Alliance critique, saying that high-level towers were both more cost-efficient and space-efficient, making most low-level towers pointless, removing a dimension of viable strategic options from the player. Well, now we have a reason to use low-level towers, and it's because we're forced to do so if we don't want to be subjected to bad luck. In theory, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. The best expansions in the series are regarded as such because they encourage the player to play differently from the meta established by all the pre-existing levels. Rising Tides encouraged assassins to be used way more than the heavily anti-barracks enemies of the Frontiers campaign, and it's extremely satisfying to go into those levels to experience that. But when Darklight Depths tries to change the meta by forcing you to beat a level without using any barracks at all, it gets the label of worst stage in the series. There are two simple reasons for this. The first is that it doesn't actually change the meta of the gameplay overall, it just reinforces the meta more strongly than ever. Enemies in Frontiers were always anti-barracks. Death Coils and Xizzy just make it even more hopeless to try to use them, to the point that Darklight Depths barracks only is one of the hardest challenges ever done in the community. The second reason is that the restrictions it forces on the player are just not fun to deal with. I actually used to enjoy Darklight Depths for the very simple reason that I could micro heroes in and out of range of death coils without taking damage. Unfortunately, when the engine overhaul update took place, replacing the Cocos engine with Love 2D, it introduced my arch nemesis, Steam Moments. The name originally came from the difference I observed between heroes on the iOS versions of the game, which used the Cocos engine, and the Steam version of the game, which used the Love 2D engine. Animations were forced to play out to their completion once they began, overriding player orders and other events that were supposed to take place. That's why you can see the Twilight Avengers finishing their Blasting Curse animation even when they should be dead. When the engine overhaul update happened, Steam Moments were brought to all other versions of the game, and under these conditions, it was no longer possible to masterfully weave heroes like Dirty in and out of Death Coil range to buff towers, or to sneakily spawn Sand Warriors before getting shot to death. The players were at the mercy of the animation links of heroes, which oftentimes locked them in a cycle of dying while using the animation, respawning, immediately going into another animation instead of listening to the player's orders, and then dying again because of it. As a result, heroes like other units were basically invalidated as a gameplay option in this level. It was just another dimension of gameplay that was taken away as a result of this. So despite being one of the few defenders of Darklight Depths when it first released, I now also consider it one of the weaker levels because of the two aforementioned reasons. This is all to say that Ancient Hunger falls into the same trap. By forcing the player to commit to low-level tower spam and still cost them some gold because of the guaranteed destruction, the player's towers overall have less power than ever before. This puts even more emphasis on hero power, further reinforcing the hero meta that Alliance already suffers from. In addition, it's less fun to spam low-level towers because they're inefficient. If the balance was such that you could say, at least these towers are cost efficient, there would still be enough neuron activation from the use of cost-effective towers to make the strategy still feel satisfying. As it is, you get neither the utility of tier 4 tower skills, nor the cost efficiency of base tier 4 towers. The player is nerfed, and for mobile players, it encourages them more than ever to break the bank and buy OP heroes to deal with this level. Even with selling enabled, trying to force the tier 4 towers to work leaves the player with less money overall, relying on heroes nonetheless. It doesn't help that flying enemies are once again the dominant force in this expansion. 1 out of the 8 enemies in these levels are flying, yet 80% of the towers I built were to counter them specifically, with the goal being to let their single target damage help the heroes kill the rest of the enemies with micro. That means that our friends the Royal Archers and the Arcane Wizards are once again the meta choices, which further solidifies the tower meta. I think that this random tower destruction mechanic is not only overbearing, but also overdone. Umbra, Spider Goddess, Malik, Deep King, Blackthorn, and the Overseer all become less special with each additional boss that also destroys a tower. I would also like to say that it's especially painful to have an RNG mechanic that you can't do anything about in a campaign where the very first level introduces a tower HP mechanic. Why couldn't this be a part of the mechanic, so that the player would be able to see it happening and try to stop it somehow? Surely that would be more fun than just accepting your fate and trying to play in spite of it. After beating the last stage with no lives lost, 3 heroes and towers only, I never want to play it again. The only other stage I can say that about is Ancient Ghosts, and even that level has more merits than this one. At least the Ancient Ghosts doesn't have the new, longest starting cutscene of any level in the game. You have to wait a full 22 seconds through the unskippable cutscene at the start of the level whenever you restart it. I don't know how Ironhide can not only keep making the same mistake, but somehow do it even worse each time by making the cutscenes even longer. That being said, I can see someone enjoying this level a lot for the simple reason of it being extremely hard. I left difficulty out of my analysis completely so far because, for one, the difficulty is dependent on your settings and which heroes you use. Plus, I care more about the idea itself and its impact on the meta of the game. But difficulty does tie directly into the execution of the idea. It wouldn't be necessary to dedicate most of my towers to flying defense if the levels were easy, which would then alleviate my criticisms of the tower meta. As it stands, Stage 22 of Alliance is by far the hardest level of that game, and is up there as one of the series' hardest levels overall if you're measuring stages with free content only. For that, I can see why someone who wants a harder hit of that Kingdom Rush drug would adore this level masochistically. I bet it will feel really good for the right kind of person when they finally beat this level under all the restrictions they want to force upon themselves. And you know what? Good for them. It will probably be one of the most satisfying victories one can have thanks to how difficult it is. On top of that, if you play it with meta options, like the best heroes and towers, then it shouldn't be so difficult that the RNG is as impactful as it was for me. That takes me back to my original claim that this could be one of my least popular opinions in the community. Back when I was an annoying 14-year-old, I once made the claim that Pandemonium was too hard because I couldn't beat it with 3 heroes on Veteran, always insta-called, no lives lost. Now that I'm an annoying 24-year-old, I can beat that level first try whenever I jump into Kingdom Rush 1. History could repeat itself, where I'll take back my criticisms of the level because it became easy enough for me that the RNG tower destruction doesn't feel overbearing. But I doubt that this time, because as I said, the idea itself is what I disagree with more than the difficulty. I don't find myself finding this fun to play in years to come. With the free content and no lives lost restriction, I only foresee this being annoying, unless I get extremely lucky, in which case the victory feels hollow. That being said, I believe the update has its merits. If you look past the campaign of the last stage, the rest of the expansion is pretty fun. The first stage gives you a lot of special towers to use, and while I found them all to be woefully underpowered, the Iron here is a legitimate challenge. I consider it one of the most useful levels for testing hero strength. On that topic, the expansion overall is difficult enough to finally make tower analysis a lot more feasible. With this plus already having access to the upcoming DLC, I think tower balance is more apparent now than ever. Whether or not you consider that a good thing is a different matter, but at least in my case, I'm relieved that it's easier to finally make a ranking of every tower in Alliance from worst to best. The boss fight is also very well done, as he's the new biggest boss we've ever had, and has multiple phases, and his appearance changes so much with each phase. It's one of the few times where a boss's abilities all feel extremely meaningful. Alliance went way too far in the last stage of this update, but I'm glad that the previous 2 levels are still fun. It may be more of the same when it comes to flying enemies, but the Hydra is our first actually meaningful mini-boss in Alliance. And on top of that, the wave composition finally gives some merit to artillery on some occasions. I think there are 3 things that Ironhide needs to do in future updates. 1. Find ways to make off-meta towers and synergies shine. If that requires balance changes to even make such a thing possible, that's all the better for everyone. 2. Keep the difficulty high, but with the ability to interact with this difficulty. No mechanics like RNG tower destruction, please. And 3. Fix bugs that didn't get fixed in previous updates. This update doesn't fix the movement bugs on Therian, Grimson, and Torres. In fact, it doesn't fix bugs with anything about the game as far as I know. If the Alliance devs have these 3 goals in mind, then I believe Alliance can finally shine as the game it was meant to be. Until then, for the first time ever, I'm actually going to swear off ever playing a Kingdom Rush stage again. Good night, Tri-State area.